Linda Goldspink-Lord loves being busy. She runs a successful business, has a passion for horses, but her true love is being a mum. Linda and her husband Peter welcomed 3 beautiful children into the world: Riley, Molly, and Emily.
I met Peter, my husband, my amazing husband, when I was 20. He was 18. We met at uni and so we've been married 30 years. Having Riley was just, I think he was just this added blessing to our life. We'd reached the stage, I had him when I was nearly 30, so I'd been married 5 years, and he was just this addition that we just loved incredibly. And I've always been so grateful to be a mum, and having him was like, wow, it was amazing. Molly arrived on International Women's Day, which was, the 8th of March, and she was just another perfect baby. And I love, because straight away Riley and Molly had this bond, and he just used to love spending time with his baby sister. And I used to watch them in awe and think, so much love between the two of them. So there was just under 2 years gap between them. Emily, our scallywag, came 3 years later, and I had to have a bit of a longer gap because Molly wasn't the best sleeper and I was a bit tired. So we had a 3-year gap. And look, Emily came into the world, how she lives it now, with absolute, gusto, and she just played the role of the youngest child that was adored and spoilt by, Riley and Molly, and she just loved it.
I was really cheeky, I was very cute, I had chubby cheeks and curly hair, and I got away with everything because I was adorable, but I was very naughty. Molly was kind of the midpoint for us because Riley would hang out with Molly because they were closer in age, and then I'd hang out with Molly. So I feel like I didn't spend a lot of time with Riley growing up when I was younger, just because there was such a big age gap. It was 5 years, and I'd spend all my time with Molly with the horses and all that.
Molly was the kind of girl who would light up any room she was in.
Molly and I got on like unreal. She was an amazing person, and always had my back. And she was the smartest person in the room and the bubbliest person in the room. And she could kind of play both roles. She was happily play backyard footy with me and then go play dolls with Emily. Molly was just better at everything than myself. Molly taught me how to do a flip on the trampoline. That's just an example. So. Yeah, very special person for both Emily and I.
She just was happy and joyful and cheeky and mischievous. And she had this heart, this gentle heart that I noticed from a young age when she was playing with her friends. She'd always give them, if I brought out a treat, she'd hand it to them first. Or if there was only one toy to play with, she'd give it to them to play with first. Or I used to look at her and think, wow, you're so kind. And so but she was funny. She had this deep, throaty laugh that would just, you'd hear it and you just want to laugh with this smile that would light up a room.
Their world was turned upside down on what was an otherwise normal Wednesday morning during the July school holidays in 2012. Linda's husband Peter was overseas, so the mum of 3 was juggling the chaos solo. In the morning, Molly helped with the dishes before going outside with Emily to take out the family's quad bikes, something they often did on their farm, 90 minutes south of Sydney. Linda glanced up at the girls and continued her chores inside. It would be the last time she would ever see her beautiful daughter alive. Moments later, Emily called to say Molly had been in an accident. Linda raced to her daughter's aid, but said as soon as she arrived, she knew Molly had passed.
As a mother, to have a child pass away, there are no words to describe that. There really isn't. There's not even a word in English language that can describe that. And if I look back on those early days, I just want to wrap that Linda in my arms and say, oh, look, hang on tight. You're going to get through this, but oh God, it's going to hurt. And there's a sense of shock. You just don't, it's disbelief. And I remember on the day thinking, I kept on just picturing the old video recorder machines where you press stop and you rewind. It's like, no, stop, rewind, this hasn't happened. And just in disbelief. But it was the pain, the level of pain I didn't know existed. And I had been through the grief of my mum, and that hurt so much. And I didn't know that every cell could be crying and screaming and aching with pain. I didn't know. It was overwhelming. And yeah, it's hard to think about those early days. Straight away, I knew that Riley and Emily's life had now changed forever. And it was almost like in this moment in time, how do I give them hope that they've still got a life worth living? And that's what really, really drove me. My life wasn't important anymore. You know, I was like, I'm not worried about my needs, but I've got to give them hope. And I like to think that Molly was whispering in my ear saying, come on, Mum, you know, come on, you got to do this. And it wasn't easy. And I made lots of mistakes, but I just knew I had to find a way through for them because they deserve that. Every day, the grief changes. It doesn't have this kind of linear approach that will start here and we'll get to there and it goes, you know, no way. In some days, it's like this cyclone and it's coming at you, or a tsunami. And other days, it was just, I was numb. And so for my friends trying to help me, what I need today is going to change tomorrow and the next day and the next day. I didn't know what I wanted. They'd say to me, how can I help you? I don't know. How do I breathe? Can you help me breathe? Is my heart still beating? You know, I don't know. So there are so many different aspects and it just kept on changing all the time. And so I learnt very early on, this is the moment right now. Get through this moment, get through the next moment, get through the next moment, and try not to think too far ahead because your brain wants to protect you, so it wants to jump ahead. You know, I won't get to see Molly married, I won't get to see my grandchildren, I won't get to see her 21st. And it would I'd be screaming inside my head, and so I'd have to say no. Because if I went too far down that way, how do I pick up the pieces to help Emily and Riley when they're trying to find a world without their sister? And then my beautiful husband, my best friend, who was overseas when Molly died, that was a whole nother level of grief. And one of the things that I was told early on was that our marriage wouldn't survive. And you look on the computer and you look up statistics, and sadly the statistics seem to reinforce that. But there was no way I was losing my best friend. My daughter just died, the children had lost their sister. I didn't want them to have their parents break up. And I know that lots of marriages do break up as a result of it. So we made a few pacts early on, and some of them are really sad to think about, but we agreed that neither of us would make a decision to end our life. And that was, you know, really, really important to say no matter how hard things are, we're here for each other. We also agreed to communicate. And I have to admit, there were times that when Peter was having an extra hard day and I'd look at him crumbling, I'd be thinking, oh no, if he's crumbling, how am I going to get through this? But I had to sort of say, no, give him space, give him time, because his journey was different to mine. He would grieve differently to me. And I had to allow that. So as the children, give them their own space. And it was interesting because sometimes I was having a really bad day, Peter might have been having a better day. He wasn't at the mountain that day, he was further along. And so then the next day it'd flip. And that was really helpful, but it was always about communicating and nothing was off limits to talk about. And for me, love is what conquers everything. And you know, the love we have for each other and for our children was going to be stronger than any pain that we were suffering.
It's one thing for adults to struggle with grief, but for children, it takes on a different form. This is the first time Riley and Emily are speaking about their grief. They want to share what they learned in the hope of helping other kids who are burdened with facing trauma at such a young age. Riley was 15 years old when Molly died.
I look back at that time and it's just all a big blur. I think we're just in survival mode at the time. And then obviously the grief just continued, and it still continues today. But one thing that's really hard to think about is like the Molly I knew was a 13-year-old girl, and like I don't know who she would be now as a 21, 22, 23-year-old. And I wish I did. Like I know she would have been an amazing person, but it's really tough to think about all the memories, all the things that we've missed out on that relationship with her.
One of the hardest things for children dealing with the loss of a sibling is going back to school, something Riley and Emily know all too well.
It was tough. It was really tough going back to school. Everyone, like obviously Molly was in year 7 at the time, I was in year 9. Everyone knew. It was awkward at times, and I'm awkward with people sometimes with grief as well. I think the most important thing I sort of felt in that time was my friends showed up. It wasn't necessarily we were talking about Molly or talking about how I was feeling, and I probably didn't really want to, because I had a lot of that going on at home, and I'm a pretty private griever. But they were there. They would turn up. They would come to my football games. They'd make sure they invite me to movies. They'd have me over, and I felt that presence. So I knew that I didn't have to actually talk about Molly, but I knew that my friends were there and thinking about me. Having a couple of hours or a couple of minutes just not thinking about Molly, which was just nice at the time when it's so constant and it's all you can think about.
Emily's grief took on a different form to Riley's. She didn't know at the time, but the trauma of Molly's accident would have a profound effect on Emily's life years after the tragedy.
I had a huge part in the day it happened, so that eventually affected me a lot down the line. But at the time, as a 10-year-old, I just missed my sister, and my sister wasn't there. That's all I really understood. But no one really understands it. No one can relate. No one understands grief that much. So I think my friends just carried on being my friends, and they were there to hang out with me and have sleepovers and keep me occupied. But going back to school was hard. I remember that was like a big point of it. I didn't want to go to school. I struggled. I just didn't want to leave the house. I think I just wanted to be around my family and stuff because that was my safe place. I got to maybe 15, 16 and I was a whole different person. I was angry, I was frustrated, I was upset, I was confused. So I'd just be sitting in class and we were doing something normal and I couldn't be there anymore. It was just too hard to be around. And the school that I then moved to, they would just let me leave. They'd let me go sit in the playground where they could see me and just let me have my moment. And that's something that I think is really important because sometimes you need a moment. You just need a moment to sit and think and breathe. And then sometimes it gets too hard, everything just gets so overwhelming. And I think that's really the biggest part is just, you don't need to say anything, you just need to let them have a moment. I realised that I had delayed PTSD. I was angry and I hated the world and there was clashes between me and the rest of the family at that time because it made the world 10 times harder. And once I realised and then I went to the psychologist and I found some amazing support systems and talking about it at home and finding ways to get through it, that's when things started to change.
Emily says her parents played a crucial role in helping her overcome her PTSD and learning to live with the grief of losing her sister. I just needed my parents to show up. My parents just needed to be there. They needed to sit with me when I cried or just have normal family moments. It didn't need to be all about Molly and the grief or suffering. We needed to still have normal family dinners and we still need to have normal conversations. But a big thing Mum and Dad did was we talked about the memories with her, growing up with her, just the stuff that we loved about her. We'd talk about it every day and it just made it normal. It made it comfortable. And then when other people would talk to us about Molly, you wouldn't freak out or get upset because you haven't heard her name in a while. It'd be oh yeah, I'll talk to you about her and give a story and you could reminisce without it being hurtful and upsetting. Linda and her family learned so much in their journey of grief, lessons she thought could help others get through the darkest point of their lives. So she wrote a book, Crawling Through the Darkness, a mother's true story of hope, light and life after grief and loss.
When people are going through that early stage grief, the first thing I say to them is, you will get through this. Because that's all they need to hear at that time. Because it's like my world has absolutely imploded. How am I going to get through this? And it's the what ifs, the brain rolls on. It's just, you will get through this. And that is a really reassuring thing. People told that to us, which was really helpful. And also to explain that grief is not something that comes and does its job and leaves. It's not that simple. Okay, we've grieved hard and fast, now it's gone. Or I'll put it in a box, put the lid on it, and it's done. Yeah, it doesn't work like that either. And a really smart person explained grief to me like, it's a mountain. That grief, if you think about a mountain, it's big, it's large, it's imposing. And the early days, all you can see is the mountain. It's that grief, it's there. And I think about how at that stage, all you can see is a mountain, nothing else. You don't notice that the sky is blue, you don't hear the birds, all you see is the mountain. But as time goes on and you move away from the mountain, it now blends into your landscape. And so when you look out, the mountain's not the first thing you see. I mean, it hasn't diminished in size, it's still large and imposing, but now I see the trees, I hear the birds, I feel the sun on my face. You need to spend time with the mountain, get to know it, sit with it, sometimes on your own, sometimes with somebody else, but allow that time in the darkness and be very, very present. And then when you're ready, you then take the next step. Now, that next step may be somebody holding your hand, leading you out. It may be take 2 steps out, 1 step back, but you're slowly moving away. It's there, but it's now incorporated into my life.
Through Linda's own experience and research, she discovered grief wasn't just a mental and heartbreaking emotion, it also took a physical toll.
One of the things that grief does, yes, it hurts. It sears into your soul. It's like acid burning on there. It hurts so much. But when the grief was biting at me at every angle, it was like, what else can I do? So I started looking at all the aspects of grief and looking at how does our health impact on grief? How does what we eat impact on our feelings? Now, learning about diet and your moods was a game changer that I learned probably about maybe 4 or 5 years into the journey, where I felt like I'd done a lot of hard work, but there was still something missing. What else can I do? How can I get Linda back? And I stumbled across this concept of gut health. And I learned about the link between your gut and your brain and your emotions, your hormones, your mental health. So once I learned about that and literally quit sugar, I noticed a significant change in my grief very quickly. It was like I didn't realise how much of a brain fog I'd had. And yes, the grief had added to that, but I'd clearly had brain fog for a long time and hadn't realised that sugar can be inflammatory to so many aspects. So once I quit it, I just felt a bit more stable. It was like I didn't have the ups and downs as much. I still felt it, but a trigger that I would have had before didn't trigger as much. Eventually, which is where I am now, I live a very different life. And I live a life that's all in and grateful and full of joy. And even the bad times that happen, I understand they're only short term, or maybe they're longer term, but there is great joy. So I didn't know that in the early stages. I just knew that grief was hard and it hurt. It was like, a flood of pain coming through. There was no way I was going to be able to put up a gate and say, nah, enough now. I knew it was coming. So it's like, okay, what am I going to do to get through that? So I was all in for my grief. I did make sure I allowed myself some respite. So that odd moment where I had a happy moment, I never felt guilty. I know other grieving parents say, you feel guilty when you're happy, but I needed that happiness to get me through the next, wave of pain. I needed that happiness so that I could welcome Emily and Riley with some nice afternoon tea when I got home from school. They needed to know their world would be okay. So that gave me the respite from that. I learnt, again, fairly early on, I had to have boundaries around my grief and other people's grief. It was like, what grief can I be responsible for? So obviously, Peter and the children, I would support them, my close, my grandparents, my parents. But apart from that, people had to find their own way through. You have to find your own way and find your own support team, I guess. Molly is such a big part of our life that even though she'd physically left, there was no way everything she was, her essence, her love, her energy, her kindness, her humour, that wasn't going to leave us. And she made it very clear very early on that she was still around.
Linda's not the only one in her family honouring Molly every day. Riley and Emily do too, each in their own way.
We always talk about Molly. Molly's in our house everywhere. It's not like she's forgotten. Like you walk around our house and there's her smile everywhere. So, and that's Mum. Mum's always led the family to be open and honest and talk about our feelings and make sure Molly's still part of our lives every day. I've always tried to sort of live my life and my journey on being the best person and doing the best things I can in life to not only make her proud, but to, I don't know, in some weird way try and fulfill her life to some extent. Her career success would have been enormous, and I feel like pushing myself to succeed in some ways might reflect a little bit on her. Her legacy sort of drives me in my everyday life to try and be the best person I can be.
I still feel like I have her with me all the time. Like when I go and spend time with the horses, or even when I hang with her friends, like I feel her around me all the time. After the accident, I had a lot of guilt because I felt like I didn't do enough as I got older. But then I realised I was 10, I had the mindset of a 10-year-old, and it kind of set me on the path to doing my nursing because I realised I wanted to never be in a situation again where I couldn't help someone. So I attribute my nursing and like my future career to that because of my sister.
It's hard. It's like, how do you move on? How do you, like, at some point, let people, I suppose, conclude that it's better just to try and forget that they lived or it happened, because like, what's the alternative? But I think Mum and our family sort of proved that there is an alternative, that like they can still be part of your lives. They might not be there every day and you can't talk to them, but you can still feel them and feel what they meant to you by talking about them openly. It's hard to give advice because I think everyone's journey is so different. I would say, first off, make sure you have people around you, you're talking to people. I tried speaking to counsellors and whatnot. I went down that route and I didn't enjoy it, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't work for other people. And I think it's important to try those different avenues to work out what your coping mechanisms is. And I think especially young men, it's important to speak up. I think grief is so often categorised for young men as being weak or down that avenue. So I think it's really important to speak up. For me, I preferred to grieve privately, and I think that's also okay. It's just working out what you're comfortable with.
I think the biggest part that's helped me and I think my family is talking about it, making it normal, making your grief known and letting people know that it's okay to have a bad day. Like, you don't have to the next week bounce back up and go back to work and put a smile on your face and be like, oh yeah, I'm fine, because you're not. You're not going to be fine. You're not going to be fine for a long time. So I think like letting your grief be known, letting people know you're not okay, but that is okay to not be okay, and to just talk about them, keep them present in your life. And I feel like some people struggle with what to say to you. And I think sometimes saying nothing is better than saying anything at all. But just being there, showing up, spending time with them, even if you just sit there, just have a normal conversation. You don't have to treat them like they're a wounded soldier and like tread gently around them. You just have to treat them like they're your friend still or your family member and just be normal.
Molly epitomised kindness. That was her thing. Let's think about what she was and she still is and how her kindness, it's Molly's kindness that is allowing me to share these stories. It's her wish to help other people. She still radiates love, and love is forever. So that love stays with us and drives us and motivates us, and she wraps us in her love and we wrap her in our love, and that's never going to change.